Jim Joyce, happy
Here we are.
Wednesday.
Happy Wednesday,
We're
man.
we're actually staying pretty consistent, even though, travel and conferences and all that good stuff.
Yeah.
Still recollecting our live experience with David Klein just staring at both of us, really like, the hell are you guys doing? What did I get sucked into?
If people thought
But
people thought we lost the plot there.
yeah, yeah, well, it could have, but that's meticulously unproduced. And looks like you had a great time at Health and lots of good stuff there. And
Yeah, did you hear the news?
I did. Congrats to Jonathan and team, right? Hive.
Right.
So
Couldn't believe it.
yeah, that's pretty amazing. And I mean, I
Yeah.
guess, obviously they're gonna keep this thing going and the vibe. So hopefully we'll see everyone in Amsterdam and then go from there.
Yeah, yeah, amazing. What a machine of a conference. So amazing, it was pretty cool. It was pretty cool. So
Yeah.
we'll go into too much detail because there's lots of news on the health out there, but was happy to be there. We missed you. We
No,
missed you. The
I,
place was a little lopsided without you.
thank you, thank you. I appreciate it. Though I don't know how much, I don't think I had that much FOMO, honestly. Like just of course,
Yeah,
missed
a lot.
seeing all the friends and stuff. It just
And you had just been
it's also overwhelming. Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
exactly. So
yeah.
anyway,
Cool.
our
Awesome.
awesome guest is waiting in the waiting room, so we'll get to him. And so
Great.
I'm excited to have Drew join us here. And it's been ages, and you still look like, when we met 15 years ago, my friend.
A
Have
little bit
not
more gray
changed.
hair. Little more
Yeah,
gray
maybe a
hair.
little bit, but at least you have hair.
Yeah,
So
You do.
yeah.
I don't know if Jim, you've ever met Drew or vice versa,
Yeah,
but
I don't think we met, although I saw you you were with Bronwyn at the Australian event. You're an
Oh,
Australian advisor, right? So
that's
I
great.
was I so
Yeah.
I listened to you a few minutes that we just talked about it health. So and I've heard I know of you, so I know of you in a very good sense.
Awesome. Well, great to see you
amazing.
in this
Well,
context.
yeah, and we're definitely looking forward to kind of hearing your journey, and so are, millions of listeners and viewers, because I would almost say you're one of the OGs, right? I think before kind of
Yeah.
digital health was digital health and all the transitions. And so I actually think Drew started the company like he was 12 or something. But anyway, with that, and look, he's taking a shot, even though it might be water. That's cool. That's
Water, water.
according to our rules. But yeah, I mean, listen, take us through just your life story. You know, as I always say, from birth or wherever you want to pick it up, and personal,
Yeah.
professional, and we'll just Jim and I rudely interrupt as always.
Yeah, that sounds great. Yeah, that sounds great. Yeah, back when we started the company in 2010, you're right, digital health was not a thing.
Oh, that's early, 2010.
Yeah, we started working on it in 2010. Was not Validic as you know it today, but
Okay.
yeah, I mean, when we launched Validic to the market in 2013, we were saying mHealth
That's right.
was the
That's
big thing.
right.
Right,
Yeah,
right.
I'm health.
yeah, yeah.
I
And
still
so,
remember at Health 2.0, Matthew Holt, right? Like kind of mHealth, Health 2.0. I think digital health came sort of later.
Right.
Yeah,
yeah, that's exactly right. And yeah, so that was a big coming out party for us, actually. That Health 2.0 conference in the fall of 2013 in Santa Clara, I think it was.
that's right.
Okay.
That's right.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
let's
So
back up to your childhood before we get to
yeah,
Validic stuff. Yeah,
yeah. Totally. Yeah.
Yeah. Who's Drew? Who is Drew?
yeah.
Yeah. Who am I? I'm a creative actually at heart,
Yeah, okay.
and I've always been very creative, very entrepreneurial. So I acted in plays when I was a kid. I was a band geek. I was always really interested in science and math, just like lots of like a very eclectic, lots of likes. But when I really think back on it, there was always something entrepreneurial. So when I was in elementary school, I created like a neighborhood newspaper. I learned how to do columns in
Hmm.
I think it was in
Word perfect.
Gosh, like it was like, I don't know, it was
You're gonna
Lotus or
age
what?
yourself. Careful, careful.
Yeah,
You're
I
gonna
know, I
age
know. It
yourself.
was This was definitely in the like late 80s, and I
Yeah,
learned how to do columns. And so I created a neighborhood newspaper,
right.
um, and like sold subscriptions for, I don't know, I think people gave me a buck or something like that.
I love it.
Um,
In
and
California, in California, or
no, I actually grew up in Kansas City.
okay,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah. And yeah, like I remember one of the articles was my next door neighbor, the Greenspans, had a garden, and so the title was "The Greenspans Have a Green Thumb."
Right,
And just and then when I like fast forward to when I was in high school, I was in a, again, band geek, right? I was played trumpet, and we had a brass quartet that was pretty good. I mean, we took
right.
state a couple of years in a row, and like it was a good, like we were proper good.
Legit,
But
legit.
yeah, we are legit. I mean, for
Yeah.
a brass quartet, and so, but I would get us. I tried to like gig us around town, and so like I got us to like play at some street festivals, and like booked at like a open shopping area. They had a big weekend, and I got us to play there. We had like a tip jar, and I printed
Yeah,
up business cards
yeah.
for us, and yeah, I was like, I mean, I was like hustling. And I never really thought of that as entrepreneurial at the time. It was just something I was interested in. And then when I was in college, I ended up as initially an engineering major, but switched pretty quickly to computer science because that was what I was started really liking, and I started developing some websites, which back in the day was like brand new,
Right.
and I realized they were ugly as sin, and so I started taking some design classes and really loved that. And so I ended up with an art degree, as well as computer
Hmm.
science, from the University of Iowa. So
Okay. Wow.
yeah, so before user experience was a thing, I had
Right.
a graphic design and computer science education,
And do you still play
which
the trump? Do you still play the trumpet today?
I have it hanging over here. I don't play it much. Play around with it occasionally for
Special
my kids.
occasions. Yeah.
But yeah, but I do love music always, and jazz is one of my favorites because growing up in Kansas
Awesome.
City, good jazz, good barbecue.
Fantastic.
So and so what was interesting though in college was that I started to use my design skills to build websites and brand identities for clients. Like I started getting clients while I was in college.
Right.
And so coming out of college, I was like, why would I go work for somebody else? Like I'm already making money.
Right.
Like, why don't I just do this? And
Right.
I had this big aspirations of having a design firm, and it was going to be really successful. And
Right.
I went to the University of Iowa. I was still living in Iowa City at the time. I started dating my now wife right as I was finishing college, and she was starting her PhD program. So I lived there for a long time, and my grandparents actually still live there in Iowa City. So it was great. I got to spend a lot of time with them. But coming out of it, I had these huge aspirations of what it meant to be a business owner, which was like fancy cars and expense accounts and all these things.
Right.
And very quickly found
Not
myself in
not
like,
broke and unhappy wives.
yeah, exactly. Very quickly found myself in like massive credit card debt and completely underwater.
Right.
And because I had no idea what I was doing. And so, I took some business classes. I actually took a fast track business class, which was really helpful just to understand like what is P&L, like what like
Yeah.
what
Yeah.
how to do expense management. And
Yeah.
and over time, really, what I learned I ran that company for about 8 years, and became pretty successful with it. But what I really learned was a couple of really valuable skills. One is pricing elasticity, and that a price is especially for a service, when somebody like who knows what price to put on it. It turns
Right.
out like you can actually price the value differently than you would if it was just a commodity. And so I started to learn how to price based on value. I started to learn how to understand the value to the client, how to communicate that better, and really taught myself, marketing and positioning and sales through that
Right.
journey, which was hugely helpful. And I mean, it was,
Mhm.
man, I remember like the first like the first experience that I had that was really an eye opener for me was right after my wife and I got married. This was in 2008. We came back from our honeymoon, and there was these massive floods in Iowa City that year. And so we just gotten married. We had no money in our bank account. I had no clients at the time. And we couldn't get back to our house because of the floods. Our street was flooded.
Like,
And
what
so we
else
were
can go
staying
wrong?
in, yeah, we were staying in my grandparents' basement. It was awful. And I just still remember today, like I would have to like tell my wife, be like, call her and be like, hey, spending freeze. Like we have no money in our account. Like we'll figure out dinner, but don't go buy something. But so, long story short, I had a client at the time or a prospect at the time that I was talking to about, it was an economic development organization about a new website. And they pitched what they were doing. I was like, oh yeah, this is great. Like I'm perfect fit for this. I really understand what to do here. And they said in that meeting, like, just so you know, our budget's $30,000. And I was like, oh man, $30,000. That's like that. They might as well said
Right.
$1 million. Like I
Yeah.
literally couldn't even imagine. And so I went back and I was like, well, I think I could do this for like 12. Like even that's a lot, right?
Yeah.
12 is a lot. And so I
Yeah.
started to put together the proposal. And I was like, you know what? They said $30,000. Like, I'm going to put
Right.
together a proposal for $30,000. Like, that's their
Right.
budget. So why not? And
Yeah.
so, I did the work. I put it together. I put a lot of thought into it, really what I would bring to the table. And, fast forward a couple of weeks later, I get a call, and they went with me. And I was like overjoyed, couldn't believe it. I mean, my phone at the time was so bad. Like I didn't even get the call because my phone was so broken that I had to take the battery out of the phone because like the phone wouldn't go to sleep, and so just drain the battery immediately. So I like put the battery in my phone, checked my messages, got the thing, called them back really quick. I mean, it
And
was
keep it
pretty
quick.
dire.
You should
Keep
have
it
told them
quick.
to fax you,
Yeah,
the
exactly.
the purchase.
Yeah,
That's
exactly.
it.
So,
That's awesome.
but later I went back to them. I said, "Hey, why'd you choose me?" Right? And they said, "Well, it's a couple things. One is we really felt like we were getting you, and that was something that was really important to us. Is that we
Right.
were not getting passed on to
Outsource.
some other team.
Yeah.
Like we were going to get your attention. And then two is they said, all of the other more boutique firms that we were looking at." They all pitched us, bids that were like $10,000 or $12,000, and we felt like
Oh,
they didn't
wow.
understand the scope of what we were
Interesting.
trying to do, but you seem to really get it uniquely. And
Yeah.
so it was actually because of, the pricing and because of how I pitched.
Right.
And the other thing I really learned in that experience was to talk in the same way your clients talk. So I would write down when they said, we want something that looks like X, Y, and Z, like I would
Right.
write those words down. And then in the proposal, I would use those words,
Right.
right? And
It's
it's
called
like such a
it's called the reflection technique in health coaching and
exactly.
talk.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And it's like
Yeah.
it's a no-brainer, right? If you're in sales, like of course that's definitely something to do, but I had no idea, but it's something I
Right.
just organically learned. And that mirroring or reflection technique ended up being like they're reading this going, oh my gosh, this person really gets it because they don't
Yeah.
remember the exact words they said, right?
Right.
But also
So this,
getting under such a high consequence situation, right? Like, so here
yeah,
you are, in the basement, battery charging phone, and then you'll never forget that, right? It's just because like you easily could have gone, I that's such an interesting lesson
If
that the
if the,
temptation is to go, hey, anything to get the deal.
yeah.
if that client is listening, you think they're going to be like, "Oh, damn it! I could have gotten them for
No,
cheaper." No, I'm kidding.
Yeah,
I'm
they
no,
don't.
kidding.
no, no,
Yeah,
absolutely not. In fact, they ended up being a very long time client,
right.
and I did multiple different uh,
Engagements.
development
Yeah.
campaigns
Yeah.
with them
Yeah,
over the years. And actually, even up until after I started Validic with Ryan, my co-founder, at some point I had to say, "Hey guys, I can't do this work anymore."
right,
Because
Yeah.
I'm
right.
focusing on my company. I'm all in on this, but
Yeah, and price is so interesting too. Like I found like in all my startup journeys or whatever, that learning how to price something, like the thought, the
yeah.
mental activity, the importance of it, what it says about you, what it says about your attitude, whether you were listening, whether you weren't listening. It's such an interesting reflection.
That's right.
But honestly, I'm also a huge fan of, to a certain extent, transparency. I mean, we're all in a for-profit businesses, right? I think everybody needs to make money and margin. It just need like, and so you're always looking for that partner to actually figure it out together in a certain
Right,
extent, right? Like, yeah,
right.
obviously depends on if you're DTC, B2B, all of that. But yeah,
Yeah, I used to
fascinating.
always say like you want me to price this less, but I actually you think you want me to, but you don't. You don't because if I price it less than what I can build it for, then it's not going to
Yeah.
be a very healthy structure or
Yeah,
deal,
for
right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
anyone, exactly.
it's actually it actually is a really interesting lesson that I think digital health is learning right now, which is
Right,
that for, a decade, VCs have subsidized the actual cost of what it takes to deliver digital health solutions.
right.
And it's created unprofitable business models
Yep.
at a kind of grow at all cost,
Yeah.
kind of grow at all cost mentality. And I think that's now changed. We've seen a lot of those companies that have been in that model go out of business or fail to
Yep.
raise funding or have to dramatically shift how they do business and certainly go through restructures. And I think that that's definitely changing, and it's really interesting to see how that's played out. Like we've always taken the stance of, hey, we're gonna do win-win deals at Validic. Like it's got to be a win for us. It also has to be a win for our
Sure.
client. And we
Yeah.
Yep.
have walked away from deals and partnerships where, hey, that's not a win-win for us, or
Right.
or the client maybe feels like that's not what they're looking for, but it's always uncomfortable, but it's better in the long run. In fact, one of
Yep.
our best partners, and I'm not gonna name a name, but one of our best partners today, we literally walked away from the deal early in our company's history, and they were like, we cannot believe that
You
you're
did
you're
that.
going to walk away from this. And we
Right.
said, it doesn't make financial sense. Like we'd
Right.
love to work
Right.
with you guys, but you got to
Right.
understand that we have to be here as a company. Like you should want our success as a partner, to be sustainable. And so they came back like 6, 9 months later, and they
Yeah.
said, okay, we're back at we'll do a better deal now.
Yeah.
But
100%.
it's an interesting point what you kind of mentioned earlier, right? I mean, the times have changed, and we look at any kind of expansion, any deal, it needs to be at least cash flow positive. Maybe and before it's like, oh, new country, sure, we'll take a loss at it because we're entering a new country, right? So
Yeah,
yeah,
Right.
but
And I think it's also you have the companies that are starting and they're trying to crack into these big organizations and maybe when you're in those early days and you're kind of like you'll do the 12 grand deal for the website. You're just trying to get in the door and you're like, okay, I don't want to put any obstacles. And you can see the logic in it, but the maturity on the procurement side was, these large, massive organizations were trying to get all of this interesting but still novel technology and services for kind of free, right?
yeah,
They were kind of saying they were like, oh, hey, you should be so delighted you're working with big company X, or that you have a chance to supply, $1 million worth of services for 100 grand. You should be delighted with yourself for that. And, because just think of the opportunity for you, out there.
the logos, the
Yeah,
logo effect.
you'll have logos on your PowerPoint slides, and you can trade that in for, that'd be worth. That's
yep,
like a collector's item.
But the sad part, it was, right? Those
It
logos
was,
were worth
could
at
be,
that time.
yeah.
But
could be.
let's get back to Drew and keep carrying us to the today. So you had your company for a number of years,
Yeah.
was successful, and then you went straight to Validic, or there was something in between?
Yeah, there were it was small things in between. So like while I was running that business, I was always looking for something that would scale outside of billable hours.
Yeah.
Because that was a real frustration for me, was, just the project-based fees or the consulting-based fees. And I was like, I'm building technology. Surely I can have something that would, and
Right.
software as a service was not yet a
Right.
Thing.
thing, right?
Mm,
And like startups were not yet. I mean, there were startups, but they weren't really
right.
called, like it wasn't really a startup scene
Just
yet.
people that couldn't get jobs.
Right, exactly. Just people kind of creating some online products. Like the online subscription model product was a
Right.
concept. And
Right.
so So I started trying to do that thing. It actually had some really interesting ideas back at the time that like I think would have been really interesting companies had I actually like kind of followed all the way through. But
Nice.
um but
No
uh
regrets.
but no. I mean, you live and you learn, right? But one of the things I did do is a very small company and exit was my wife has celiac disease, and one of the things she found was that not only does she have to be worried about what she eats, she has to be actually worried about the cosmetics that she puts on her
Mm,
face and hands because a lot of the cosmetics had gluten in them.
right.
And that was a problem, causing her a problem. And it was a real challenge to call the device or call the cosmetics manufacturers and understand what,
Check it
what
out.
was in there, all of their ingredients and all that in order to. So she had built a list, and so I'm like, well, we had a gluten-free blog that we had created and we were selling
Mm,
advertisement on it. I'm like, well, why don't we sell a subscription to this cosmetics list? And
yeah.
so we built that concept, and we had other ideas of how we were going to build out more subscription models around that type of service.
Interesting.
And then we ended up selling that to
Well,
to somebody on Flipper, actually, which was an interesting sale process. But we ended up selling that and making a little money on it, and that was nice. It was nice to kind of have hand that off to somebody else who had a
Yeah.
passion for it too.
okay.
And then I had a couple of things that didn't really work out, but I was considering kind of the next company I was going to start. And my co-founder, Ryan, came to me and said, hey, look, I want to do something in healthcare. Both of us come from the Midwest. He grew up in Wisconsin. I grew up in Kansas City. Both of us have families in rural Midwest, where all the food is grown, but like kind of food deserts and like pretty
Interesting.
unhealthy. And
Yeah.
so we thought, how can we create a company centered around helping normal people be healthier? And he had actually read an article, I think in Time magazine, about a weight loss challenge at a YMCA in Georgia that was really successful. And so he had created done a concept with just like pencil and paper, going to health clubs in Lawrence, Kansas, where he was living at the time, to sign people up for these weight loss programs. And they were really successful. And it was kind of a pool mentality where you'd pay an entry fee and then it would pay out winners. And this was back when like The Biggest Loser was on TV and all this
Right.
stuff. Like I know it's like very antiquated now, but like it was kind of hot at the time. And so we were talking about it the whole time, and he's like, hey, I think there's like I'm getting asked to run these for corporations. Like maybe we could build some software for it and they could do it themselves. So I built the software. We had some early success there. It was called Scale Down Challenge, and um, we were starting to grow the company a little bit. And the pitch was, hey, it's free, guys. Like all you do is you pay employees pay the entry fee. We take 10%, $25 entry fee. We take $10 of our entry fee, $15 funds the prize pool, and then we pay out.
Right.
Really simple idea. And actually like pretty good results. Like, people had some behavior change that happened. Some
Right.
people didn't keep the weight off, but some people did. Like some people really did.
And
It really actually
and that
changed some
was
people.
2010-ish. That
This
was
was
like the
2010,
first
2011.
iteration.
Okay.
Okay. Okay.
And then, so we raised a small seed round or small friends and family round, I should say, in mid 2011. Went full time. In Q1 of 2012, we got into Tech Wildcatters down in Dallas, which is a business to business startup accelerator. And in Tech Wildcatters, we started to really expand our vision and think about, everyone's throwing around, the $1 billion opportunity there. Like we were thinking much smaller at the time. But then, well, what's the $1 billion opportunity? So we started thinking about that. And as we started talking with more and more folks, we realized, oh, there's actually a lot more here. Because one of the things we kept hearing from corporate wellness executives was, look, you guys are doing weight loss, but I got a lot of problems. I got smoking cessation. I
Hmm.
have, people who just need healthy movement. I have lots, we were talking to the person who's running benefits for Southwest Airlines at the time, and she's like, I've got different needs for my baggage handlers than for my front desk attendants, than for my pilots and my flight attendants. Like every one of them has different needs. And so, we were sitting there going, well, how do we create more programming options? Like with just two of us, we don't have any money, and like we can't create a better fitness app or a better step tracking app than Fitbit, or a better running app than Runkeeper, or a better nutrition app than MyFitnessPal. Like, and then one night we were sitting there on a Friday night, we're just like, wait a minute, what if we don't create them? What if we just
The
partner with
aha
them?
moment.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we just like use them. And like we create incentives to use the products, but everybody, largely uses the consumer health devices as the programming option. So that was like kind of our big pivot at the time. Going through that program, we started to build all of these integrations to all these apps and devices. We were going to build all these health incentive programs on top of it to help people use it. And then we took an early version of that product out to the market. This was like late 22, or sorry, late 12, 2012,
2012,
early 20,
13.
early, yeah, early 2013. And everyone's like, hey, look, cool idea, but really crowded space. Shape Up's already raised a bunch of money here. Like there's all these other companies that have raised a bunch of money in the space. It's really crowded. And so they were like, but no one has the data. Like, how
Right.
can you guys just license the data? And so we heard that enough times. And like, I think this is a really important thing as an entrepreneur, early stage entrepreneur. Like when you keep hearing the objection, don't keep pushing, lean into the objection. Like people kept saying the data is interesting. Like, okay, great. So we started saying, well, what if we just offered the data? Which is like, it's such a simple question. People are like, oh, well, that would be interesting. Yeah, how would that work? And so we
Right. Right.
started,
Right.
and then all of a sudden it was like a different conversation. There was a lot of interest, and so we started to realize like, oh, and so we market tested the concept of Validic. We literally came up with the name, the logo, a website, everything in like 6 days, because we had purchased an ad in Welcoa
Hmm.
already. Welcoa is the Wellness Council of
I
America
remember that. Yeah. Yeah.
magazine. Yeah,
Sorry
and
about
so
that.
we had already pre-purchased this ad. Yeah, dude, there it is. So we came up with this.
I love the Wayback Machine. So for the listeners,
Yeah,
not the viewers, we went to Wayback Machine to 2013 here to see Validic's
yeah.
website.
The style sheet didn't convey, but yeah, that's
Yeah,
right. That was
well,
like how our branding was and all that, man. And so when we conceptualized it, the concept was basically, to selling to the corporate wellness vendors. And because Wellcoa was something for corporate wellness organizations, it was almost like ask your vendor if Validic is right for you. It was like a drug commercial, like because but from that one thing we got, 22 demo requests. Our second ever demo request is still a client of ours today. Our
wow.
second ever
Wow.
demo. And from that initial campaign, we closed our first $45,000 deal in like 60 days. And so
Wow.
it was just like all of a sudden, like we were like, oh, this is the thing. Like this concept of being an API for all the personal health data is the thing. And from there we went. We were struggling to rub two dimes together. Raise any money at all, and we ended up close with the initial progress, closing an additional 150K in seed, and then Mark Cuban ended up coming in July of 2013 to
Oh,
close out our
amazing.
seed. Yeah,
Oh, wow. And
yeah.
you didn't have to go on the den or
Did
the
not have to
Dragon's
go
Den.
on Shark Tank. No. So it's actually a cold email. So his email is like a bit of an open secret amongst startup
Yeah.
founders. And so
I've emailed him like 4 times already, trying to get him on the show, by the way.
right.
Just
Yeah. And so yeah,
yeah.
we emailed him like a very short email with attached to deck and said, hey, we're raising. And within a couple hours, he emailed back and asked us a couple of really bright questions, really insightful questions. And we freaked out, and then we responded. And then a few hours later, I remember this was July 3rd of 2013. A few hours later, he emailed back and said, all right, I'm in, but we were asking for $150,000 to close out our seat. He's like, I'm in, but will you take 250? And we were like, yes.
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 Right, 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 right.
But the reason is, it's with Mark especially, he's a very thesis-based investor, and it's just timing, right? He had invested in Breathometer, which was a digital,
Yeah, I
breathalyzer
remember that one.
company. Yeah, and one other sort of what we would now call digital health company. I think he called it personal health companies. But he was thinking to himself, well, at some point, this data's got to get back into the healthcare system. Like, I don't know how that's going
Right.
to work. And then Validic comes along with, hey, we're the company that takes all this personal health data and brings it to the healthcare system. He was like, sold.
Yes,
So
exactly. Yeah.
yeah,
Interesting.
yeah.
But you guys, I mean, I looked it up quickly, and it's interesting, right? Because that around 2012, 13 was kind of the explosion of all the devices, right? The Jawbones, the Fitbits, they were all kind of coming into the scene in, late
Right.
or early tens. So it was also just the timing, right? I mean, people say it's hard work. Yes, it's a lot of friggin' hard work. We all know it, but a lot of time is also partially luck and timing, right?
Yeah,
So,
yeah,
and
that's right.
and you guys raised something like 30 mil in all of this time. I mean, I know again you were alluded to some startups that raised a shitload of money, crashed because the investors were
Right.
subsidizing, but
Yeah, we've been pretty capital efficient, all things considered.
yeah.
I think that's really important because it's helped us have really rational expectations from both a valuation perspective as well as continuing to grow the company through the challenging times, and make sure that I think a lot about employee incentives and what's in it for our team. And every employee that's ever worked at Validic has had stock options.
Okay.
And I think that it's important when you raise those big mega rounds at absurd valuations. A lot of times those options, when things come back down to
Yeah.
reality, are now underwater.
Sure.
Yeah.
And so that's something that I think a lot about. Like I think it can be de-incentivizing for employees when that happens, because all of a sudden, creates a big challenge, frankly, at the board level. Even like, do we need to cancel and reissue all the options, or like how do we deal with that?
Right.
I mean, it's something that we
Yeah.
fortunately never had to deal with directly at Validic because we've been thoughtful about how and when we raise.
Right.
It's interesting, right? Because up until kind of, I'd say relatively recently, as like we've been chatting here and there, right? But like, I still thought of you guys as this like API company, right? And yes, there's the consumer devices. There's also more on the private, on the clinical device side. So I think you guys did it all from what I remember. But you're not that anymore, right? I mean, also, right, as you guys were one of the first, there were other companies and I think there's almost a dime a dozen now on the API side. And so I think you guys have evolved too. So I'm just kind of curious
Yeah,
how you thought about it. What was that trigger to say, okay,
Evolution.
well, we built a business around this API, but now,
Layer.
right, how do we
Yeah.
forego, or not necessarily forego, but how do we evolve from here? What was the trigger, and what are you guys now?
yeah, absolutely. So we still have our health IoT platform. Like that's something we still
Yeah.
offer to the market, and we have a great business there. We support a lot of innovative companies in the space around that. And that will always be the core of what we do. In fact, we've had at this point now approaching 20 million people go
Wow.
through our health IoT platform over the last 11 years. So pretty sizable.
Yeah.
And certainly it's the kind of the most awarded platform, and have an ongoing list of devices. But the challenge that we really saw in maybe about the 2016 timeframe was that in order to really drive utilization, which ultimately drives SaaS revenue, right, is that we needed folks to use the product. And we certainly had some success with selling to digital health companies, as well
Hmm.
as selling to the enterprise. But when we really started to talk with clinicians in healthcare, which we felt like care delivery was always a real natural, like helping get our data in front of physicians and nurses to help drive better patient conversations, there was always a gap. They didn't know what to do with the data. It wasn't enough to just have the data. They needed the insights, and it needed to be in the clinical workflow. And so what we kept hearing was, I need to, I don't want to look at data that's outside of my workflow. It needs to be in it. I need to know if there's something important to pay attention to, because I don't want to look at the data all the time. And it also needs to be something that's just a part of of what I do every day. Like it can't be
Yeah.
something else. And so as we were conceptualizing this, Kaiser Permanente, who was an early client of ours, as well as also they led our Series B round in 2015. One of the telehealth leads there came to us and said, "Hey, let's really talk about what we're trying to do with your data. We're trying to bring it into the clinical workflow. We're trying to visualize the data. We're trying to surface notifications up so the clinicians know what to pay attention
Hmm.
to. And they said, it turns out we're bad at building software. Is this is this something that Validic would be interested in doing? Because we could really use some help. And we said, hey, we're actually going to do this anyway. Like this is kind of where we're
Perfect
headed.
timing. Yep.
Perfect timing. And so, so they became our design partner for this. They actually funded some of the development of the solution, and we built a really deeply embedded, integrated EHR solution for the personal health data. It kind of makes personal health data a first-class citizen of the EHR. So, like in the same way that a clinician orders a lab where they go to the patient chart, they select the lab they want ordered, the sample gets taken, sent for processing, the results come back into the in-basket, the clinician reaches out to the patient, talks to the patient about it, types clinic notes. That same workflow is what we've enabled for personal health data. And so we launched that with Kaiser in 2018. And that program now is the largest remote care program in the country. There's been over 450,000 patients enrolled in
Wow.
programs. Over 7,500 clinicians have enrolled patients in programs across 7 regions of Kaiser, which is about 20 Epic instances that we support. And it's everything from, RPM type programs around, diabetes or hypertension, or hospital to home programs with, heart failure and COPD and pneumonia, as well as more sort of ongoing, just condition tracking programs like, ongoing well-managed diabetes or hypertension, or gestational diabetes programs, or weight management programs for folks now who are on GLP-1s, things like that. So it's a whole spectrum because we're built on that IoT layer as the core. It's a whole spectrum of services that we can now offer with those clinicians in the Epic clinical workflow. We're also in the Cerner or Oracle Health clinical workflow
Yeah.
as well. Yeah.
Drew, can you talk about just when I look at, I just came from visiting my 84 and 85-year-old parents in Florida, and and I'm looking at it in as a device guy that's implemented programs over the years, and I'm still looking at their little tiny home in Florida, their 2-bedroom, they love it, it's sunny outside, over 55 community. Like a lot of, and they've got the closet full of blood pressure monitors and maybe even some of the devices I've created over the years, and it's all sitting in there. And in there's that life seems the same as it was 15 years ago, and they might go through moments of using it. What's your own view on the data about are these devices like? And I looked at your list, 450 devices. It's amazing on your IoT platform. What's your own view on the adoption of these devices used regularly and how clinicians are using them
Yeah.
with the
Yeah.
data set?
So I'll say most devices don't need to be used all the time. I'll give you a really good example of this. Like I just used a CGM for a couple of weeks, continuous glucose monitor for a couple of
Yep.
weeks to give me insights into how my nutrition is impacting my health. And it was really insightful, really helpful. It gave me a few things to key in
Oh,
on. I had a great
curious.
conversation.
Lingo? Did you use
No,
Lingo
actually,
or?
I use the Freestyle Libre.
Okay. Yep.
And yeah, the Lingo and the Stello I'm really excited about though, the new
Yep.
OTC sounds. Yeah. But I use the Freestyle Libre. My physician
Yep.
prescribed it for me.
Yep.
But next time I actually probably will use the OTC. They're actually cheaper. It's really, and they have 30 days instead of 14.
2 weeks. Yep.
Yeah, yeah. And so, but just even just those 2 weeks really gave me a ton of insight and had enabled some really good conversations with my medical team around what to do for me. And I think that's the way to use these devices is that, if you have hypertension, you don't need to take your blood pressure every day, always. But, while you're, newly diagnosed and you're getting your meds locked in, you absolutely need to take it twice a day, every day, because that's how you know what the right medication dosage is. And then if every, probably 3 to 6 months, it's a good idea to do that again for a couple of weeks, right? So I think it's good to check in. Now, that being said, if you have diabetes, different story. Like you need to be doing that every day. Like if you actually have diabetes, the only way to effectively manage that condition is to really know either with the CGM or the finger prick what's going on
Oh, I
all
mean,
the time.
everything impacts it, right? Like it could be a stress
That's right.
point. It could be actually exercise can spike glucose, right? Whatever
That's
that
right.
might be. It's fascinating. But
Lack, yeah,
what
sleep is a big one too for that. Mhm.
what fascinates me even more, I think, as you guys have, 450 plus devices,
That it's
and that
actually 580 if we're
okay,
counting.
apologies. I'm just following Jim, but should have
Apologies.
asked you. Um, I think it's actually fascinating because you can almost stratify based on the profile of that individual, the disease type they have, the usage patterns, and the behaviors that, ultimately can help better outcomes, right? I don't know, I'm just going, thinking about the amazing data that you guys have view into.
Yeah, absolutely. And so some of the things we have data on that we're looking at adding into our product is, around how can we help our clinical users understand how a patient is progressing relative to the mean. But the interesting thing about an opportunity with Gen AI is that we've actually been doing machine learning on our data for um, gosh, 8 years now, I think, since 2016, really. So and we've developed some products with it. We developed a capability to use the camera on your phone to take a reading off of a non-connected medical device so that if someone has a legacy blood pressure monitor or glucose meter or whatever,
Yeah.
you can just use the camera on your phone to scan the screen and turn that into a digital asset and send that up so it's eligible for CMS billing and things like that as a digitally delivered reading. Now, that being said, so we use machine learning on that.
Yeah.
The other sort of things we did with our data, though, is we could predict really cool things. Like we could predict when someone's going to stop using a device. We can predict blood glucose values a week in advance, like within the accuracy of the meter itself. And so we would take that, we actually took that out to our clients and say, hey, so we can do some really cool predictions. And they're like, oh, that's great. So what do we do with it? And so like we were like, well, I don't know. Like, isn't that your
Right.
job? Like, I don't
Yeah.
know. And so like,
Yeah.
and so
I just predict. I just predict.
yeah, exactly. We were like, gosh, like how do we solve that so what problem? But
Right.
Well, for
now with but now with
go
Gen
ahead.
AI, like now there are opportunities to
To do
solve
something.
that so what problem because
Yeah.
now
The
it's like,
interaction.
hey, we have indications that this person's going to stop using a device, or we have indications that this
Right.
person is going to have glucose levels that are outside of their range, in the next week. So now rather than saying, hey, look, we know something's going on, like it's like, you can't do the minority report,
Right.
precog thing. But what we can do is engage that person and remind them about why it's important to be taking their readings or what's important about keeping their glucose in
Yeah.
range. Ask them
Right.
if they have any questions about that. And you could use Gen AI to do that in a way that you couldn't do before. Like before, it almost required a human intervention, or else it was like a very
Yeah.
basic,
We
educational video or survey.
It's funny with my last company, we had a prediction algorithm and we had like an 80% confidence interval that you were going to miss your next injection. You're going to
Yeah.
miss your next injection. So we would send people a text, you're about to miss your you're about to miss your next injection. And they're like, no, I'm not. You know what I mean? No, I'm
But
not.
Yeah.
but it's I
And they
mean, I think
probably
there
didn't because it reminded them to do it.
Yeah.
but there are, I mean, there are use cases, especially for health systems, right? Like on rehospitalizations, the HEDIS
Sure.
measures. I mean, there's a bunch of stuff that
Yeah.
can be used for. Um, Listen, we can keep diving deeper and deeper, but I do want to give Jim his creative time of asking the his famous last question. So I'll hand it off to Jim.
Yeah, there's no creativity here, but so you get you get a letter, you get a fax in the mail. I don't know what that means. You get an email, and it's from Mark Cuban's office, and he's inviting you because he's going to be doing the commencement speech at the graduation, and he's invited you to come along to join him in the commencement speech. So you're at Iowa State, you're being invited back there. There's a whole cadre of people, and he's going to be talking, inspiring all these young graduates in the engineering department but he's going to ask you to come up as one of his most successful investments and give the final moments. And you give this great talk, and the place is in the marching band sets up, trumpets are going off. You're leaving the crowd off the stage, and they're just cheering at having such a successful speaker at their event. This one young man looks at you and he says, "Drew, you don't understand, Drew. I have to talk to you, Drew. Drew, I'm a marching band person. I started a newspaper when I was in school. I had built technology companies, and eventually, and I'm just about to step into the field of digital healthcare." And you look at that young version of yourself, what's the one piece of advice you would give them?
Yeah. The one piece of advice is I would say is get to know your customer intimately. Like you have to really understand, and it's not until I'm able to articulate my customer's story directly as if it was my own that I truly understand the problem that I'm trying to solve. And every time I've gotten to that point, success has fallen. It's really hard sometimes to get to that point, especially in healthcare when you have multiple stakeholders and multiple
Yeah.
decision makers. It's really, really challenging, but it's absolutely critical. And sometimes what we've found in selling to health systems and plans is that means you have to understand what the VP of clinical transformation is thinking and worried about, what the chief medical officer is thinking and worrying about, what the CFO is thinking and worrying about. You have to understand that from different
Yeah.
perspectives, but you have to be able to very clearly articulate the answer to that question.
Love it.
Fantastic.
Well, thanks for making it happen, Drew. Appreciate it. Good to reconnect more live. And for all of our listeners, hit subscribe, pass it on, and see you next week.
Thanks,
Awesome.
Drew.
Sounds great. Thanks, everybody.